Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome and thank you so very much for being here with us. We know your time and you are precious, really sacred, very, very, very valuable. And we suspect that if you're a little like us, you've experienced life. And none of us get through the first couple of decades without at least some trauma. But we are here today with one of my favorite people on the planet who really believes in what we do and why we're doing it here at Positive Prime. And I am just going to say, Dr. Diane Shelton, I need to ask, do we call you Dr. Shelton or Dr. Diane? And I'll explain why, because our Positive Prime community is truly global. We have lots of people in Asia, and lots of people in the Middle East, and in Europe, and in the UK, and in Australia and New Zealand, and in South America, and in North America, yes, the US and Canada. And I've noticed that here in Australia, we have a very relaxed, familiar way of addressing our doctors. Even my physician, her name's Claire. And there are, I think, some people who stand on ceremony. So to be fair, should we be calling you Dr. Diane or Dr. Shelton or just Diane?
So I think what you just pointed out is the most important piece, and especially in today's climate where power differentials are front and center, and there are cultural differences, and there are power differentials inherent in titles. And so I'm not hung up on a title. You can call me whatever's comfortable as long as it's not, hey, expletive. So it really makes no difference. It's really, I think, an extension of what's comfortable for the person. And I understand that that's culturally sensitive. So I'm good with it.
Okay, beautiful. All right, well, Diane, for everybody who is joining us, you are one of our Positive Prime professionals, and you are actually the author of a really amazing session called Transcending Trauma. And I've got 1,000 questions to ask you, of course, but what I would love for us to do is go back a little step, and can you just share your story about who you are, where you are, what you do, and then weave into it, of course, how you found Positive Prime, why it interests you. And I'm going to try, and everybody who's really familiar with me knows it's going to be hard. I'm going to try to keep my lips zipped so we hear more from you. And then of course, in this, I really want to get deep into what is trauma, how do we transcend it, is it possible? What do adverse childhood experiences have to do with the work that you could offer? And then why do we want people to watch your session, and what is it that we're hoping that they will experience as a result of the learning from your wisdom and your experience? So I'm handing it over to you.
So you're going to come back again with those questions, because I'm not going to remember all of them from the front end, but because I could talk everybody's ear off because I'm passionate about this. So a little background, I'm a clinical psychologist in the US. I've been licensed in 5 different states, and that's meaningful because different states govern the profession differently. And so that has really stretched my learning of how to do this. And I've also supervised in different mental health disciplines, which also stretched my mindset. And going back to becoming a psychologist, which I never set out to do, my foundations come from a multicultural basis. The school that I went to was very multicultural in its emphasis. And so it's a very serendipitous path that I got to this point, because I never set out to be a psychologist, and I didn't come from an educated background, and it was sort of a trail of crumbs and a very long unfolding sort of story. But what I can say over 20 years into this is I am doing what I was built to do, and I'm forever blessed. And, you know, if I God forbid something happened and I died tomorrow, I would die the richest woman intrinsically, because it's been worth it every step of the way. Which, by the way, I will die with my student debt. That's okay, because it's worth it. And somewhere along the way, like I said, I've been doing this long enough that when I got introduced to positive psychology, when I was in graduate school, it was in its infancy. It was sort of this offshoot that really wasn't even covered in classes. It was just sort of a side discussion, and I couldn't get enough of it. It resonated strongly with me because, by contrast, my field is so focused in everything that is ill and wrong, and those kinds of models have driven our field for way too long. And so this was sort of a really breath of fresh air. And so I pursued it as much as I could. I think I went to the first World Congress of IPPA, the International Positive Psychology Association, in Philadelphia. And it was just so exciting. And I was a practitioner at the time and really hungry for a application, for tools. How do I put this great research into action? And we really didn't have much. So skip forward to 2015 or 16, I was at a networking event in Tampa, Florida. And I came across at a table from a couple of marriage and family therapists, Valerie and Michael, and they had this thing playing. And I was like, oh, that's lovely. Well, tell me about that. And when they started to talk about the positive psychology and the neuroscience, my chin just continued to drop. I mean, this was just, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but it evidenced every bit of science they were talking about and that I knew as my foundation, you know, kind of growing up as a psychologist. And I just was so excited, elated. And so I've been a fan of it ever since. And so I can't say enough about it. I think I will give the caveat that as a clinical professional, we have to use responsible tools. But I've also been of the perspective that I'm from the side of the tracks that, like, hey, if it works, you know, and it's safe, let's, you know, not be afraid. And so I don't know, I have a little bit of an edge to me when my field decides to give a fancy name to something basic. So when we talk about some beneficial thing for a client to read, we have to call it bibliotherapy, which it's those kinds of things that really, you know. So anyway, I'm not afraid to push the envelope and try new things, always looking out for my clientele and really assessing with them what they're comfortable with, what fits for them, making whatever interventions we're doing very unique to them and their style and situation, and assessing kind of clinically a step ahead of where they're at on their behalf.
Wow.
So that was kind of a mouthful.
No, that's beautiful, and I love it. So I need to probably also help you to say to everybody, you actually donated your genius, your wisdom, very generously, your insights, your heart, your best thinking, to the actual Transcending Trauma Positive Prime session, and you make absolutely no money from it whatsoever. None, zero, zip. And when you actually came across Positive Prime, I would love for you to explain, what is it that you saw in it that you thought was of value? Because a lot of people don't know your perspective. They hear mine and that's lovely, but of course I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm going to say something that's going to be convincing or persuasive. But what do you see in it?
So coming to that table at that conference or that event, armed with familiarity of what is positive psychology and what are the ingredients of happiness and those kinds of things, when Valerie started talking about things like the Duchenne Smile. I knew exactly what that was, you know? And so for anyone who's not familiar, there's a difference between a genuine, what's called Duchenne Smile versus a say cheese for the camera. And our eyes and our brains can recognize the difference. And this interacts with the neuroscience part, the mirror neurons, and we respond differently when there are certain stimuli in front of us. And so when Valerie was describing, because I think Michael was away from the table at the time, when she was describing those elements that go into the images and the design of positive prime, it was in valid science that I was familiar with, and I was seeing it reflected in these images and the statements and everything that I was seeing in front of me. And it all made sense with what I knew scientifically to what she was describing as presented. So it gave it street cred immediately.
Yeah, wow. Diane, let's really talk about, you're a pretty special person, having been exposed to rather dramatic, high profile, traumatic situations. So let's talk about what it is that you understand about trauma and how you came to those observations. And I think that for everybody who's here, it'd be great if we go through like 1 or 2 exercises that really could help the everyday person lift a little bit of the weight that maybe we're feeling is on our shoulders at the moment. Of course, today we're recording on the 11th of June down under, and the evening of the 10th of June 2020 in North America. And the backdrop, of course, is riots, COVID, and indeed real grief for people whose family members may have been really ill or have passed, people who are scared and fearful about their businesses exploding or imploding, people who've been furloughed or lost their jobs. And this is like everybody across the entire planet. We're all in this together. And instead of really talking about the situation now, the reality is that there has been a lot of trauma and there will be a lot of trauma in the future. That is part of the human experience. So let's talk about trauma. What is it? Can we actually transcend it? Why?
So I have worked with human beings at their best and their worst. When I say worst, I'm talking about having worked in the worst circumstance I think a human being can be in, and that's incarceration. And the worst thing that we do in incarceration, the worst sanction we can give someone is to isolate them. That's what we do. It's, you know, and human beings disintegrate in that kind of a situation. So the importance of each other, as you say, we're all in this together, is very true. I've worked with human beings at their best when they're finding their best, when they didn't know they could accomplish X, Y, or Z, or feel X, Y, or Z. Or, for example, I had a depressed client who described once he was kind of climbing out of all of that and getting back into his life, he said, I can live in color again. And it was so poignant. And so just seeing this whole spectrum of little and huge transformations of humans has always fed my soul about never giving up on someone. Always believing that, because I've seen people come in and out of efforts at change, whether it's spiritual or through psychotherapy or fitness or whatever, and never give up, because you never know what little thing is going to really unlock and open the pathway for someone. And timing is always a big key part. And trauma, some fields, you know, some areas describe little t and big T trauma. You may have heard reference to that, but trauma is a very subjective kind of experience, and what one person experiences may not be traumatic compared to someone else, or the same thing at a different point in time. And when I think about, for example, our military members who have gone through deployment after deployment after deployment, and why, you know, they were more traumatized by a lesser conflict in one deployment versus another one, it can, you know, make a big difference. And it leaves people kind of really scratching their heads of what's wrong with, why am I falling apart over this little thing when I've survived, you know, all of these bigger things. That's been another ringside seat of mine in my clinical service. In my employee assistance program work for organizations, I was ringside seat to tragedy of Sandy Hook Elementary, and just extraordinary community damage that something like that does, and was able to rally and be of service to others not only, but largely because I could stay steady for them, because I understood my own home community having the same thing happen in Tucson, Arizona. And so when I say transcend trauma, it means that you're never going to live life like it didn't happen. That's unrealistic. And I think we need to equip people of how to move through it, beyond it, and do something good with it. And that's why I chose the term transcending, because it really is, when I witness people moving through these sort of stages, if you will, although that suggests that it's some distinct, you know, numerically lined out thing, it is transcendent, and so I can't think of a better word. If somebody has a better word, let me know. And I think about our mind as sort of a filing cabinet, and sometimes we come across something, and whether we want to or not, this powerful thing reaches in and grabs something that we had tucked away in the basement and nicely out of our reach. And we didn't want that, but our brain serves us. Sometimes I think your brain gives you what you can handle and what it's challenging you to finally handle, maybe. Because I've seen some stuff unlocked and pulled forward, and the person looks at it differently because of that opportunity that it got included in that. But sometimes we can be unprepared for that. And what I've seen with people who have gone through that kind of a process, or who have experienced the trauma, there's so much self-judgment. And if I can say anything, it's not your fault. And judging yourself is one of the greatest obstacles you can do for yourself. You know, what I find is people would give more compassion to someone else than they would to themselves. And so that's really a big part about my encouragement is, you know, let's be as compassionate to ourselves as we would be to someone else in this process, and really trying to encourage that. And maybe jumping ahead here a little bit, but with the brilliance of positive prime, what I'm seeing is people can find symptom reduction from doing the work. And believe me, it is work. There's no quick way around it. And it takes work and it takes help. But the negative thinking is just so deeply ingrained. And this is one tool that I have found that under the proper care and circumstances and used appropriately, which I will acknowledge this is not designed as a clinical tool, but it can be used very appropriately, like bibliotherapy, to help work through that, bypass that negative thinking. This is one of the things that was so exciting to me about it, is that it was a way to get some positivity in by leapfrogging over that prefrontal cortex and getting something good in there.
Wow. Okay, so you just touched on so many little things that have been a theme over the last couple of days. I love serendipity and synchronicity and coincidence.
Yes.
I've been talking about how incredibly difficult it is for most of us to really be compassionate towards ourselves. So even though we weren't going to actually go there, Diane, what does being compassionate look like and sound like and feel like? And I would love for you to actually kind of highlight this, because I believe that a lot of us have these disempowering habits or behaviors, or we take these actions because we think in some way it's serving us, and yet ultimately it's not. And the example might be, I have a fear that I'm going to lose something, and therefore I'm experiencing anxiety, even though I might not label it like that. And then I go and have an extra glass of wine. And actually, I don't really want that extra glass of wine, but somehow it takes the edge off. And I think, oh, relaxing and having a glass of wine is me taking really good care of myself. Not if it was actually initiated by anxiety out of a fear of loss, right? So I do see that a lot of people justify self-love in really strange ways.
So when it comes to being compassionate with yourself, and I will own, this is my opinion, this is not psychological theory, this is how I understand guilt. Guilt is not a natural emotional state. We have basically 4 universal roots of emotion: mad, glad, sad, and scared. Guilt is built mad, glad, sad, scared. And I think if you're from like maybe New York or Jersey, you can make it rhyme: mad, glad, sad, scared. I don't know. Anyway, guilt is a feeling state we arrive at as a result of a whole bunch of should and should not. Our little recording devices start from a very early age of filing away a library full of should and should nots. And that's where we begin this sort of, beating ourselves up mindset and mental language. And we replay it, and we replay it, and we replay it, and we reinforce it. And then the rest of the world, we go to school and it reinforces it. And some mean girls, do their thing and they reinforce it. And then, oh my God, we start dating and that gets reinforced, and on and on and on and on. The messages, subtle and overt, reinforce, get reinforced. This is an extraordinarily difficult thing to change. And it's a very, when we're little, we're a passive absorber of the messages that we're given. And we just sponge everything up, good, bad, and indifferent. And that is, how our brain shapes our identity and the rules and what's expected and what we want. And all of these things get reinforced and shaped, feedback loops and all of this. When it comes time as an adult, after the brain has grown and we've got this evaluative frontal lobe that, dictates everything, it's a very cerebral process to engage in. At least this is how I worked with it with my clinical clients. To really be front and center and thoughtful about tuning in. And, cognitive behavioral practices are built on all of this, of really tuning into what we're thinking. And I'm just saying, take an inventory of all of those should and should nots. You get, as an adult, to decide which ones that work for you, which ones to modify, and which ones to completely discard. And that is a huge task, none of us want to go in and clean out our closet, but this is a very useful exercise to do cognitively and a big piece of work. And it takes a lot of practice to really change some of that thinking. And like I said, you have to be very conscious about it, because it's not going to just happen, and just mantras aren't going to get it for you, so it takes very focused work that's purposeful, and that you take a look at what your real value is. And if you truly, here's the thing, if you really don't value yourself, you wouldn't still be here. So on some level, somewhere in there is self-value. You got up today, you're here, you have value and you know it on some level, and you have permission to pull that out and start growing that, you know?
Yeah, wow, I love it. I love you. I love that you're so real as well as so accomplished. And, you know, of course, my favorite subject is gratitude. Otherwise, I wouldn't have, you know, become a bestseller based on my little book of gratitude. And you know that gratitude is built into the fiber, the beingness, the everything, the formula of positive prime. I love this value because that's actually how I got there. I got to really valuing myself, really loving myself, which was a very foreign concept 15 years ago, through the process of thinking about what am I really grateful for about me and why and how. And how do I show up in this world not taking anything for granted? The fact that I have my eyesight, that I can hear, that I get to, you know, take a step. I'm going to just as an aside tell you about something really extraordinary, Diane. You're going to love this. And I'll try not to cry, even though I had some tears last night. So the girl that I was a roommate with when I went to university, and I know North Americans call it going to school, but you know, here in Australia, if you go to school, it means you're under 17 years of age. Anyway, so we were in business school, and we actually were such great friends. Anyway, she moved to London to work and live abroad and experience all of that and be adventurous. And I rang her and I said, I want to come to London. I want to do what you're doing. And I want to make it in the world, in the big world, not in like some little like backwater place called Sydney, Australia, or Brisbane, Australia. You know, I had this perception that, you know, it was only real and amazing if it was in New York or London. Anyway, so I go to Paris, and then it was Wimbledon, and I go and stay with Maria. And she said to me, whatever you do whilst I'm having this conversation, make sure you leave all of your baggage in Australia that is all what you could or wouldn't or should or can be, and come to London and know that nobody knows you, and you can be whoever you decide you want to be. Bring with you your luggage, but no luggage, no baggage. And I was like, so we were like 18, 19, 20. We were so young, and she knew this. And she had a sister who was had cystic fibrosis. And so she had watched this process her whole life as a sibling. Now, cut forward a couple of decades, like 3. And last night she friended me on Facebook, and I was so surprised because I had been really wanting to reconnect her. The last time I saw her was 10 years ago, and she has had 2 really difficult marriages, very abusive marriages from what I understand, and she's had few children, and she loves being a mother, and she had a serious stroke about 18 months ago where she was left completely paralyzed, couldn't speak, nothing, right? Can't see through one eye. And what is amazing is that the universe somehow reconnects us in the last 24 hours when 48 hours ago, because of your influence on me, Diane, I'm having a meeting with this woman named Dr. Cara Burns, who is telling me that the state government may have some research funds that we could access to examine or investigate or at least consider positive prime for traumatic brain injuries and stroke survivors. And I'm like, and here is a girl who is one of my closest, dearest, nearest friends. And on her Facebook page, she is videoing herself in physiotherapy, and just couldn't even touch her face, and then couldn't even touch her forehead, and is now moving again. And so I'm crying with this appreciation of courage and determination and perseverance and the human spirit, and so I connect with her, and then there's just humor, and she actually thinks that she's blessed, and she's so grateful that every single day she gets to learn something new, right? And she literally still can't walk or speak properly or type. The message has got lots of I'm trying to make it out. And the exploration for the applications for positive prime and what it could really mean, you ignited that in me because you had this very genuine conversation with me about, yes, it's great for vision boards and gratitude journals, but what if, Kim? You know, what if? So talk to me about gratitude and the process in overcoming and transcending trauma, and what are the other key ingredients that you believe that are necessary that we need to foster?
So a little bit ago, I mentioned we can't do it alone. And sometimes having someone just hold the possibility, just hold the gratitude for the traumatized person alongside, just acknowledging, I know you can't feel this right now, but I can, and I'm going to hold this for you because I believe there's a day where you're going to connect with this at some point. And just being that sort of surrogate, psychological surrogate for someone in a trusted situation. And I have to just say, you know, that really respecting where the client is at and being very delicate, because the power differential is inherent in the relationship, and the, in my mind, the professional really has to respect that and make the space for equalizing that, you know, and keeping that front and center, and always inviting in. And, you know, clients sometimes for their own stuff, and that's why they're there, can't, won't, are afraid to, whatever. And so just making the space possible. And that may mean holding the gratitude, holding the hope, holding the possibility, makes a big difference. And I've seen this happen more than once, that just the longevity of being able to do that for someone. And it doesn't happen like, oh, I'm ready to walk through this door and I'm on the other side of it now. It's in tiny little droplets that happen. And that's okay, because one day that's going to be a full bucket. And so let me just hold on to that and capture every drop as it comes and remind you there's drops in here. I've seen them, I've held them. And giving that back, you know, and encouraging the next step. So I do think that it is a side-by-side process, and isolation is the worst thing we can do when we're really self-defeating. That, like I said, is the worst place I think a human being can be, and, you know, can be spiral and become very heavy. So being willing to be humble that way, and I'm not a psychologist who has all the answers. I'm not, you know, perfect in what I do and how I do, and I just can't not be true to me, and yet also honor my ethics and my professional standards as well. But I'm willing to say, you know, there was a day where we were too afraid to step out a little further, and I'm willing to do that. And let's try this, always alongside with the client. And so it's a side-by-side process. But I mean, I think it's important to be creative and try whatever, you know, using something that is a natural fit for that person. If they are creative in some way, using their craft or creativity in the form that comes for them and expanding on it, using what the professional knows to, like, let's expand that and make it a useful tool for you. So I think I veered a little bit on what you're talking about, but gratitude is an essential ingredient to happiness. And we can't always grab it on our own. And sometimes it's a matter of pointing out, well, you know, the cars stayed in the lanes miraculously today, you know, like, how does that happen sometimes, you know, where today this basic thing was so successful and we're grateful for it. You know, lots of bad things can happen, but if we look for the good, we have to learn to look for the good, you know that. And then when we start to train our brain to do that, the gratitude grows. We're able to make more space for more gratitude.
Yeah, wow. When you designed the Transcending Trauma program for us at Positive Prime, what was your intention? What did you hope that viewers would experience as a result?
So it's truly a pay it forward project for me. I wanted other people to know that others have transcended trauma. They've been right where you are, and you can get there. I wanted it to be an instigator of hope. And what I did when you gave me the great opportunity to do this, which I'm forever grateful for, I reached back to former clients and asked their permission to contribute if they wanted to. And I asked them things like, what helped you? What messages stayed with you? What helped you get from this place to that place? Because I was witness to it, and I can come up with things that I think, but it's more important, what do you name? What really helped you brick by brick build that path for yourself? So largely the statements and some of the images are from those clients who, here's, you know, something that was helpful to them. Sometimes it was something that was meaningful to them of their own creation, and sometimes it was something that I had no idea, but they said it was a message I gave them. And so it was sort of built with, if you could help somebody who was where you were, what would you want to have in here? What would be helpful to you in that process? And so that's how that was built. And it is, you know, I don't want any money for that. I want a healthier world. My philosophy is really basic, is that each of us were of healthy mind, we would all get a healthier world. It's that simple. It's a basic math equation. Just one person. It's all you have to do is deal with the health of one person, you know? Just take care of that.
Wow, that, I mean, it's so huge. I sometimes, but it's not really a joke, say in a joking way, when I'm asked in media interviews, you know, why did you create Positive Crime? I said, because I couldn't run for Miss Universe, and so I, you know, no, I'm joking. I was joking then. No, because actually I really believe in peace on the planet, and I need to, not everybody needs to do this, but somehow I needed to contribute to that in a meaningful way. And I wanted to do something that would be enduring and something that would really be kind of exponential in terms of acceleration. I've been such an intense person about trying to accelerate everything in my life. I'm slowly learning the lesson that I need to slow down because sometimes acceleration and everything is not so perfect. However,
you're all gas and all brake, right?
Exactly. And there've been a few spiritual interventions that get me to stop, right? So that I somehow get a knock that's loud enough for me to pay attention to it. But anyway, Diane, tell me from your perspective. I, of course, have put a lot of my own personal photographs into the session so that when I watch Transcending Trauma, my identity and ego and prefrontal cortex, it's almost like there's a beautiful string theory, but there's this interwoven integration between me and the messages, so that somehow my other than consciousness thinks it's about me, for me, through me, in my benefit or advantage. Do you think that there is actually a benefit to making sure that you see photographs of yourself within the content? And if so, why?
Because if you don't, it's this external thing. This is the pathway to internalize what you're getting. And especially if someone has images of, okay, trying to remember when I was happier or when I was thinner or pre-trauma self, that you're who you are before that thing happened or in spite of it or better because of it. And so it makes it more possible when it is something that you more strongly, your brain grabs onto. It's more familiar, your own face, and people around you that you care about. And how do you not feel happy looking at, you know, your cute pet or whatever? but it stimulates the brain in a positive way, and it makes it more familiar and therefore more possible. And especially with trauma, we're looking to strengthen hope. We're looking to strengthen the sense of possibility. Like if you've been through something so horrific that there's no, your brain, one of the things with trauma is it is so emotionally disturbing because there's no familiar place to file what just happened, right? What you've just been through. And so it takes a while for your brain to decide, okay, I'm going to build a place to put this thing. And so when you start to grab, what's more familiar and safe and positive that you can really attach yourself to, it's going to be more powerful, because there can be a tendency in that negative thinking that I talked about earlier to just kind of keep it all external, and that's for somebody else, and I can't relate to these positive images and these beautiful souls and their joy, and because my life has been destroyed. And so bringing the possibility back of you're still who you are before that, or that connecting it. I mean, I think it was pretty creative with you inserting your face to things that you aspire to. And that might be a good pathway to try as well, of if the hope is there. I think it has to be realistic and something that someone can grasp. And again, in a clinical setting is a little different. I think this will be used a little differently than like business. But I do think that mirror neuron, that important piece of making it relatable and applicable to your own life becomes so much stronger when you have your own images in there.
Yeah, wow, thank you.
Yeah.
I love that perspective, actually. I really appreciate that.
Uh-huh.
There are some other questions that people often ask, and I would love to hear your answer to it. Should I watch it fast or should I watch it slow? So what do you feel when you watch sessions, Diane?
So I think this is quite a variable kind of answer. And like in a clinical setting, I'm always asking if people have any kind of seizure background or flashbacks in trauma, and trying to assess their comfort zone, and introducing it in small steps. And so only introducing, like watching it for 30 seconds or a minute at a very slow speed, and then talking about it. So how I would introduce it in a clinical setting is not at all how I would be using it as a consumer myself. And there are some days where I need my hit of positivity, and I got to get onto a meeting, so I'm faster because I want to get my 3 minutes in and get my dose, and that kind of thing. And then there's some days where I just want to savor it, and if I've got the time, I'm just gonna float in it. And so with some former clients I've had who, for example, I was using it with someone who had some attention deficit issues, and the faster speeds were better, and kept them, more engaged. Whereas for some other clients, like, no, I really want to mentally chew this, and really get in there and absorb it. So personal comfort, clinical appropriateness. And so there's a lot of different ways to use it in a good way. And, I think I may have asked you about this, and I don't know if it's applicable yet because I haven't tried it, but being able, like, there are some of the key, like the original happy tune, music. Like, it'd be great if somebody could have, play which of, maybe 3 different settings of, one. The original one for Transcending Trauma was very soothing, calm, spa, gentle and gorgeous. And then there's, very happy, energetic, motivating, and then, something that's sort of mid-range, which I think is, what's on there now, because I wanted to up the energy level of it, because Transcending Trauma is work. You can't soothe, spa your way into it. Is not going to happen. So there has to be a little bit of a balance, but it's also a very gentle, careful process that needs care. And so hopefully the music there strikes the right balance. But I think the more features as you continue to build this, the more tailoring people can do. I think like their personal images, like you're saying, the more they engage with it and the more they're going to get with it. But again, you know, more research. This is growing, and I'm just so excited for all the promise that this has.
I love, 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 love that. It does. It actually has so much promise, doesn't it? Just like all of us. You know, one of the interesting things is that I am happy to say I'm nothing like the woman that I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I kind of think I'm a whole heap brighter and better. But I love who I've become and who I am becoming. And I'm so excited because I know that who I will be in 10 years time and 20 years time, and hopefully I get to be 30 years time, it is about fulfilling our really grand potential, the promise of who we are, and doing so also in a very contented way. Like I used to be a lot more ambitious, and some people think I'm still ambitious, but I'm a whole heap kind of less ambitious and more comfortable. And one of the beautiful things I think that COVID has actually taught me is that, you know, there was a moment where I was just in acceptance and surrender. If this is the way it was going to be forever, just imagine how would I actually become peaceful about the way it is and not want it to be a different way and all of that comes with that. But how could I actually just be okay here and now, you know? Alrighty, so should we open it up for some questions, or can I ask you, is there any one exercise that you think is of value to the majority of people just for enjoying life or becoming healthier? Like, is there something that you ask everyone to do?
Yes, there is sort of, when we talked about this, of course, you know, anything that I'm building, helping a client build a tool bag of coping and improvement and all of that is very tailor-made and, you know, clinically appropriate and timed properly for where they're at and all of that. But this is a basic kind of, it's so basic that it's beneficial to everyone, and can be each item tweaked to each person, you know, what works for them. But you have, everybody has a built-in mnemonic, memory device for improving your existence on this planet. And it's 5 things. So unless you've had tragedy or something, you know, organic that, you know, that's one way to remember. The other thing is it's thinking, drinking, breathing, sleeping, and moving, and we'll go through those. So thinking, we'll come back to thinking because that's where you come in, Kim, with your brilliant tool. So first and foremost, the best thing anyone can do is properly hydrate. And most people, unless they're really purposeful and learn about it, are walking around subhydrated. And since your brain is made up of mostly water, that helps so many things if you just properly hydrate. There you go. Cheers, hydrate. And so, because of obviously the brain runs everything, and a dehydrated brain is a stressed brain. And by the time you feel thirst in your mouth, you are already several steps into dehydration. So it's affecting systems that you're not even aware of. So that's the first and foremost, is proper hydration, and it gives you so many benefits. So that's the drinking part. And in the practice of proper hydration, for every dehydrating thing that you either ingest or have environmentally, you need to up your water intake to compensate for that. So that's a piece of work. Sleeping, sleep hygiene, Google it. We, in our device-oriented world, are doing so many things to disrupt healthy sleep patterns. And so getting proper sleep is really, really important. And so it's not about just what time you go to bed and, you know, what time you're getting up, but what you're doing in between in your waking hours that is disrupting maybe your sleep, like not being hydrated will disrupt your sleep. And so hydrating properly is one thing, but also preparing for proper sleep. And that means gearing down, giving your brain time to gear down, keep the phone if you can away from your bed, and, you know, all of those kinds of things. But practicing good sleep hygiene, which is put some work in it, you know, like you would put in good nutrition. You have to really understand what your body needs. And not everybody's sleep pattern is the same, but we have seriously dangerous consequences if people are not properly rested. So sleep, so drinking and sleeping. The other thing is moving. We know all the benefits of exercise. So it doesn't matter if you're in a chair, you know, and you need to just flap your arms, or, you know, or if you moving your head, or whatever movement you can do to get moving, and anything to get moving, because we've just become a society of sitters, and they're calling sitting the new smoking, and we have to compensate for that. So that's the moving. So breathing, we all know the benefits of relaxation breathing. So we've got breathing, drinking, sleeping, and moving. And it closes off with thinking. Learning to think optimistically. So everything from positive psychology that we know, all of the happiness advantage that we've been taught, and the positive priming is a way to, like, hydrate. This is how I would describe it when I would talk about it with potential users, is that you don't drink a glass of water and think, okay, I'm hydrated now and I don't need to drink anymore. It's a regular thing. You have to, it's a regular practice. And so when it comes to a positive mindset, it's a purposeful thing because we're bombarded with negative things. So you have to constantly choose to pursue positive input. And this gives you more bang for your buck, really, is just brilliant in terms of how much benefit someone gets from just the 3 minutes a day, let alone, you know, anymore, and a regular habit with it, like you would do all the other things. And so if, you know, the 5 finger, you know, isn't a mnemonic, then it's sort of a thinking, sleeping, breathing, drinking, and moving, you know, so there's this sort of physical built-in reminder. What's my movement today? How much water have I had today? What's my sleep this week? What do I need to do to make changes, and all of that? And gosh, have I watched my positive friend today? Or done a gratitude journal, or whatever.
Totally. Well, of course, if you upload a whole heap of photographs that remind you how blessed you are, how fortunate you are, how lucky you are, and there are all of these triggers for gratitude, you're actually doing a gratitude practice in the exercise of viewing a positive prime program every single time you do it. That's actually, for me, it was, how do I apply the psychology of gratitude? And I was only saying to someone yesterday, so I'm going to take this opportunity, right? When I first met Professor Stephen G. Post, when he was speaking at a conference, it was like, gosh, maybe 12 years ago, and I showed him my little book, and he said, you know, Kim, when you experience profound, deep, intense gratitude, you actually increase oxygen absorption from the bloodstream. And I went, really? And like my eyes lit up, and all of a sudden I'm fizzy and buzzy and like, wow, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I've read research about how when you feel this incredibly gorgeous appreciation as emotion, you increase elastin and collagen production. And that's actually really good for your muscles, you know, so if you're stressed and you're a little bit tight, you know, if you can actually really anchor yourself in that thankfulness, there are these physiological benefits as well. So before you leave, because I'm actually, all of a sudden I'm visualizing, or maybe just dreaming and hoping and wishing, of a series with Dr. Diane Shelton, where we actually now go through loneliness, or we go through other things. Seriously, in my brain, I'm starting to think about a teaching series with Dr. Diane Shelton. So if you're up for that, let us know. You don't need to answer. Yeah. Oh, see, sure. Alrighty. So tell me something. How many clinical psychologists do you think that we need in the positive prime community as professionals to see this, to experience this, to understand this before we get a change in the possibilities of doing research for clinical applications?
So I don't know, because we're a funny lot. And I think it's hard to say. When I think about, so we, the science speaks to us, but I don't fit my profession. I'm a black sheep of my profession, because in my mind, what happens right in front of me with a client is more important. And we need science. We absolutely need science, because we've done some rogue things that weren't good for people at all, and in fact harmful. And that's our first thing, is do no harm. But at the same time, we, in my opinion, have gotten away from a part of our field. And so I don't know that I'm the best person to speak for psychologists in that way. And do we have a second for me to give like a really pointed example?
Yeah, of course.
So
everybody's still here. Seriously, everybody's still captivated.
I love you all for being here, and thank you. I'm so pleased. So I'll try to be really quick with this, but this was such a brilliant story, and I, I'm not going to identify her, but I'm going to have her permission to talk about her transformation. She's somebody who came to me to do EMDR, and it's a trauma treatment, and that's a whole other discussion and tool. And before we got to that, because you can't just jump right in with something that powerful, you got to, do some work first and make sure it's the right thing to use. And let me preface this with, in reference to evidence-based practices, which are ruling the way it's done now, that and insurance of what gets paid for and all of those things. And so these are really necessary, but at the same time they've run amok. And here's my example that shows why you can't, as a practitioner, be just focused on, here's my menu of items to choose from. And you have to trust what happens organically with the person. And again, that side-by-side equal process. So when we started diving into her background, some pretty horrific trauma was uncovered, and was the basis for why she could not deal with anything green. She didn't eat greens. She couldn't clean her house. Very averse to green and cleaning products, and come to find out this was part of the traumatic incident was there. And so this was sensory restored. And her body, this was a middle-aged woman who had irritable bowel syndrome, and was, just sort of, you got to avoid all these foods your whole life and all of that. And when we started talking about these things, her body started saying, I'm not letting you go there. And she had to run to the bathroom. And so fortunately, my office was next door to an acupuncture school. And so we worked together on what would be okay for her, and her permission and willingness and all of that. She went and got some acupuncture to get her body to settle down, so that we could keep having these conversations. And I didn't know yet all of the story of the trauma. And of course that came out later, and it explained the aversion to green. And so little by little, we kept working on the trauma and those kinds of things. One day she came in and said, there's a fern outside your office that I like. And I'm thinking, that's very green, but she's verbalizing liking this thing. Somewhere further down the road, she tells me she actually touched it one day after session. Further down the road, little things, like I ate a salad. I cleaned my kitchen. These little things kept going. One day she came in and said, I can't wear them yet, but I bought a set of green bra and panties. It's like, wow, okay. Little by little by little, green entering her life and stuff. And, you know, one day she's sitting in my office and doing so much better and this and that. And she tells me that she's wearing the green panties and she's just grinning from ear to ear. Now, if I had followed this prescriptive, you know, what are your goals? Let's make this treatment plan, this very canned sort of evidence-based, I wouldn't have listened to what was organic for her, and I could never have predicted the goal of therapy is for you to wear green underwear. Never would have happened, right? And so I think that when I think about using something like Positive Prime, it's not how many psychologists, it's about the right practitioners who are aligned with how to use this appropriately and how to help it grow. And I think that the best research opportunity might be some open-eyed student and their dissertation. You know, like if I were a student and I was doing my applied dissertation, like I would want to use this with groups of people to see if we can accelerate the progress that good psychotherapy is doing, you know, and creating a measurement tool to measure maybe the negative thinking or the symptom reduction or rebound of symptoms that do happen, and, you know, things like that. I just think that I can envision a bunch of different ways to try to see what difference this tool can make in the same psychotherapy we might be doing otherwise, but how much more it can help the process.
Yeah, wow. Oh, see, like that's so take a deep breath in, Kim, savor this gorgeous experience. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege as always. I'm sure that if everybody can go to the chat and drop some love for Dr. Diane Shelton and tell her if you want her to come back. And if so, do you have an inspired idea right now? Maybe we can see her again in another month or two, depending upon her schedule. So, Diane, I just actually want to alert everybody that are you still in private clinical practice in case someone wants to reach out to you, or not because you're actually working on a particular pathway at the moment?
So I'm working for a large organization that has some pretty strict rules about, you know, non-external work. So I'm not in private practice. However, I'm still a psychologist, and that is, you know, first. And so if anyone wants to contact me, my email address is drshelton@msn.com. And I'm happy to, you know, be a sounding board or share information, or, you know, I'm not offering clinical services, but, you know, I'm dedicated to the betterment of humanity. So we'll help someone find a resource and, yeah, try to be of help in some way if it's within my scope.
Thank you. You've got to, can you see the chat, Diane? Do you have the chat window open?
Can I get the chat? I mean, I was watching all of this, but I'm paying attention, and I, you know, to you and our guests, and I want to see, like, I'm so thrilled. That's like, wow.
Yeah, do you know what? I will also send you a copy because I think we've actually saved the chat. Thank you, Dee Terrell. Thank you, Jackie. And if anyone's got a question that you want us to address, please let us know. Of course, we're inviting you. If you are not yet a member of Positive Prime, please go and sign up for your free account. Make sure that you use the referral code of the person who has actually told you about Positive Prime. That's best. Usually that gives you a session. You will also receive 120 credits just for joining with the referral code, which means that you can go to the actual shop, look at the shop and see all of the different programs. There's hundreds there for you to choose from on all sorts of subjects, and we're very proud of every single one of them. And naturally, we really want you to upgrade your account. And that's because we want you to be able to access the functionality that allows you to edit, to upload your personal photos, because it is actually so important. It's very powerful. Diane, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everybody's saying they love you. They love you. Yes, they want you to come back. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Kathy's beautiful. I love Kathy. And you know what? I think, Diane, you're in Denver, Colorado these days, aren't you?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and so is Kathy. So maybe I'll connect you two via email and you could be friends.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you know
And maybe when COVID goes away, we'll have coffee or something, you know? Like.
Woohoo! Exactly. All righty. Okay, so big hugs, everybody. Know that you are absolutely magnificent. You're amazing. Thank you, Diane. And we will send this out via email soon and via our Facebook groups. All right. Love you, love you, love you.
Oh, love you. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.